She stared at the photo on her pillow for a long time, long enough for the morning light to shift across the room and catch the faintest shimmer of dust rising off its surface, as if the picture had just been placed there. Her heart thudded in her chest, but her hands were steady when she picked it up. The edges were cold, colder than the room, colder than paper should ever be. Alina told herself it was a prank, a strange, cruel joke from someone who knew too much about her face. Maybe a digitally altered photo printed on vintage paper. But when she examined it under the light, the ink bled slightly at the corners, like it had soaked into the fibers for decades. No signs of modern printing. No watermark. No explanation. She placed it back in the envelope and shoved it into a drawer, locked it, didn't look at it again for 3 days. But the dreams didn't stop. Every night, she found herself in a long corridor lit with candles. She wore a dress she didn't own. Her hair was pinned up in a style she had never learned. And at the far end of the hallway, always shrouded in shadow, was a figure, a man in formal wear, head bowed, hands clasped in front of him like someone waiting at an altar. Each night he called out to her, not with desperation, but with longing. The kind of voice that doesn't beg for attention, it expects it. "You're late," he said in the last dream. "You promised." On the 4th day, the envelope was gone from the drawer. She searched everywhere. Then, as she sat down to catch her breath, she saw it propped upright on the dining room table, perfectly centered, as though it had always belonged there. She didn't remember putting it there, didn't remember unlocking the drawer. When she flipped it over, something had changed. There, on the back, written in red ink so faded it looked more like a stain than writing, was a single line. May 17, 1973. She said yes. She ran cold. Alina had never said yes to anyone, never planned a wedding, never wore a ring, never made a vow. And yet, she knew the handwriting. Not exactly, but her hand twitched in a way that recognized the curve of the letters. Like muscle memory responding to a gesture it had once made 1,000 times. The rest of the day blurred. Every time she turned a corner, she expected to see someone standing there. Her own reflection in the window startled her, not because it didn't look like her, but because for half a second it looked older, more tired, more bridal. That night, she taped the photo face down on the inside of the drawer, locked it again, and placed a chair in front of the door, just in case. But in the morning, the chair was undisturbed, and the photo had returned to her pillow, still warm, still waiting. She stopped trying to fight it after that. There was a weariness in the haunting, persistent, yes, but not violent. It felt like waiting, like someone who had stood in the rain too long, holding flowers that had long since wilted. Alina found herself speaking aloud when no one was there, sometimes without realizing, answering questions she couldn't remember being asked. One morning, she woke with words written in the condensation on her bathroom mirror. "The church is still there. She hadn't touched the mirror, hadn't even showered. But the handwriting was neat, familiar. She didn't know why, but she Googled local churches, narrowing it down by the style of the architecture in the background of the photo. It took hours, scrolling through images and archives. But she found one, an old chapel nearly 2 towns over, now decommissioned and abandoned since the late 70s. The date carved above its door read 1873, close enough to be wrong, close enough to matter. That weekend, she drove out there, alone. The chapel stood crooked against the trees, its roof sagging, vines growing through the broken, stained glass. She didn't go inside, just stood at the threshold, heart racing, breath caught in her chest. She didn't need to enter to feel it, something heavy in the silence, like a song waiting to be sung. She reached into her bag, not expecting to find it, but somehow knowing it would be there. The photo, unburned, whole. Now the groom's face had begun to form, no longer just an outline, but soft features, still blurred, still not quite real. He was still arriving. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in her apartment, with the lights dimmed, and a stick of sandalwood incense burning in the corner. She placed the photo on the table, upright, centered, like a framed memory that didn't belong to this version of her. The air turned cool, not cold like breath against skin. She felt him before she heard him, a whisper behind her ear, and the pressure of fingers that didn't quite touch. "One more step," he said, and her hands moved without her. Folded, steady, rehearsed. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. But the ring, one she didn't own, was already on her finger. Smooth, heavy, familiar. When she finally fell asleep, it was without dreaming. But the next morning, her pillow smelled faintly of roses and ash. And on her nightstand, beside the photo, was a single pressed flower she couldn't name. It had no stem, no leaves, just 5 white petals, thin as breath. She placed it in a drawer, closed it slowly, and left it there. Because some things, she realized, don't follow you to haunt. They wait, quietly, lovingly, until you remember the vow you never knew you made. The room didn't go dark, but it dimmed in a way that felt intentional, like light was stepping back to give memory space to breathe. The reflection in the mirror was no longer the apartment behind her, but the chapel rebuilt, candlelit, its pews lined with shadowed figures who didn't move, didn't speak, simply bore witness. The Alina in the mirror stood upright, veil over her face, hands folded, the ring on her finger now gleaming as if newly polished. And beside her, where before there had only been air, stood the groom, no longer scratched, no longer smudged. He was whole, his suit pressed, boutonniere fresh, eyes soft with something ancient. He looked at her not through her, but at her, like someone seeing home for the first time after a long exile. Her breath hitched, but she didn't cry. Not fear, not joy, just gravity. A sense that her body remembered this weight, this moment, like muscle memory returned from some past life. The incense smoke wound its way between her fingers, circling like a vow being sealed. The groom extended a hand, not through the mirror, but through her. She felt it in her chest, in her bones, a touch that was more presence than pressure. He didn't speak this time. He only smiled, the kind of smile that forgives, that waits. The kind that mourns not what was lost, but how long it had taken to return. And then quiet, not silence, but quiet, like the pause at the end of music before the world exhales. The mirror no longer reflected anything, just a silver surface, cool and blank. Alina stayed kneeling, not asleep, not awake. The room didn't shift back. It simply settled, like dust after a ceremony long delayed. When dawn touched the windows, she was still there, dress perfect, eyes open. The ring remained. The flower from before now lay on the floor beside her, wilted, spent, like it too had waited long enough. And outside, the world turned as if nothing had changed. But something had. The apartment no longer echoed, no longer carried the ache of absence. It held breath now. It held memory. And when someone came knocking days later, no one answered. The door was locked, the windows drawn, but on the kitchen table sat the photo, new, clean, untouched by time, bride and groom together, smiling softly. Behind the glass, a faint smudge of a fingerprint lingered near the edge, tipped in faded red, as if someone, somewhere, had finally said goodbye. Or maybe, finally, said yes. They filed the report as missing under ordinary circumstances. But there was nothing ordinary about how the air in the room felt, like time had folded inward. The officer who touched the wedding photo said it was warm, though the apartment was cold. The ring on Alina's dresser was no longer there. Neither was the white dress she'd kept pressed in the back of her closet, gone, as if it had never existed. But there was one more thing no one could explain. The mirror. It hadn't cracked, hadn't fogged, hadn't dulled. But when anyone looked into it, they felt wrong. Like it held a depth that didn't reflect light quite right. One investigator, a man in his 50s, glanced into it and swore he saw movement, not Alina, not his own reflection, just the suggestion of someone standing behind him, quiet, waiting, dressed in white. He refused to return after that. And even after the case went cold, even after her name faded from the news and her things were boxed up by strangers, the mirror remained in the building. No one dared remove it. No one wanted to, because it didn't feel like furniture anymore. It felt like memory made real. Some nights, tenants from neighboring floors said they could still hear faint footsteps overhead. Light, even, like someone walking in lace. Sometimes they found white flower petals on the floor in the hallway, too fresh to have come from anywhere nearby. And once, just once, a child in the building told her mother she had seen the bride through the crack under Alina's old door. She had been sitting on the floor, facing the mirror, smiling without teeth, hands folded like she was waiting for music to begin. The The mother scolded her daughter, told her not to lie, but that same night, the woman found a pressed flower on her windowsill. Same as the child described, white, soft, and smelling faintly of sandalwood. She didn't throw it away, just closed the window and sat quietly for a while, staring at it in her palm. Because some part of her believed that promises last longer than lifetimes, that not all doors open to rooms. Some open to vows left unfinished, and that love, when buried deep enough, finds its way back not as flame, not as fury, but as a whisper in the quiet, asking once more, "Do you remember me now?"